Imagine the silence of an ancient library where candles flicker in the semi-darkness, casting trembling shadows on yellowed scrolls. Here, among these sacred texts, lies one of the most amazing mysteries of human history. The riddle of how a figure that once served as a heavenly judge gradually turned into a symbol of absolute evil. How a name that simply meant adversary or accuser came to inspire terror in generations of believers. Greetings, my dear listeners, and I invite you to write in the comments what city you're from and what time it is. Let's feel how our shared history connects us across time and distance. Tonight, we will embark on an amazing journey through the pages of mankind's oldest book to trace the birth and change of one of the most controversial images in world culture. We will move slowly, like archaeologists, carefully brushing the dust of centuries off each word, each line, to understand, when did Satan become the evil we know today? Let's begin our journey from the very beginning, from the moment when the name itself first emerged in human consciousness. The word Satan is as old as the sand dunes of the Middle East. It came to us through centuries and languages, from Assyrian Satan, Hebrew Satan, Aramaic Satan, Arabic Shaitan. And in all these languages, it meant the same thing: adversary, rival, one who accuses. In ancient Hebrew, Hasatan is literally translated as rival, and in Arabic, Shaitan carries the meaning of accuser. Imagine an ancient courtroom. Not our modern courtroom with the judge's gavel and jury, but a heavenly courtroom where divine justice is served. Here, in this mystical space where time flows differently and justice is eternal, the figure of the prosecutor appears. He is not an enemy in our sense. He fulfills an important function, like a prosecutor in a modern court. His task is to find flaws, to test the truth of faith, to make sure that righteousness is really pure. This is how we first encounter Satan in the oldest texts of the Old Testament. He is not an independent personification of evil, nor does he oppose God as an equal force. On the contrary, he is a heavenly servant, an angel who fulfills a special, albeit unpleasant, function. He is the one who tests, who asks difficult questions, who tests the strength of human faith. The most famous story that reveals this role of Satan is the story of righteous Job. Imagine a man living in prosperity and contentment. He has a family, wealth, and health. He is pious, obeys all the commandments, lives in harmony with the divine will. And now, a marvelous scene unfolds in the heavenly halls. God says to Satan, "Have you paid attention to my servant Job? There is no other like him on earth, a man of integrity, just, God-fearing, and away from evil." And Satan answers, not with malice, not with a desire to harm, but with the professional thoroughness of a prosecutor. "Is it for nothing that Job is God-fearing? Hast thou not fenced him and his house and all that he hath on every side? The work of his hands thou hast blessed, and his flocks are spread over the earth. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has. Will he not bless you to your face?" In this dialogue, there is no confrontation between good and evil, in the sense we are accustomed to understand it. What is at issue here is the nature of human loyalty. Does man love God for his own sake, or for the benefits he receives? Satan in this story fulfills the role of what we might call a devil's advocate in the most literal sense. He asks uncomfortable but necessary questions. And when God allows Satan to test Job, something amazing happens. Stripped of his wealth, his family, his health, covered with scabs, sitting in ashes, and scraping himself with a skull, Job does not curse God. He suffers, he questions, he demands explanations, but he remains faithful. And at the end of the story, his faith is purer and deeper than it was before. This role of Satan as a tester, as one who finds weaknesses and makes us play better, was understandable and even necessary in the ancient Jewish worldview. There was no concept of fallen angels in Judaism, no concept of hell with fire and brimstone, no concept of heaven in the Christian sense, no concept of absolution or original sin. Instead of personified evil, there was the concept of Yetzer Hara, the evil beginning or evil influence that is an integral part of human nature. Think of this concept as the inner voice that each of us has. Not a demon, not an external force, but a part of our own nature, the part that inclines to selfishness, to laziness, to anger, to envy. And a person's task is not to get rid of this beginning completely, which is impossible, but to learn to work with it, to choose how to react to it, to use its energy for constructive purposes. In this ancient understanding, man was not a puppet in the hands of higher powers. He was a being with free will, capable of choosing between good and evil, between right and wrong action. And Satan in this system was not a tempter in the Christian sense, but rather a catalyst that helped man to manifest his true nature. The main mission of the Jewish people in this tradition was understood as tikkun olam, healing the world, not preparation for a better afterlife, not saving the soul for eternal bliss, but concrete work to improve this world, doing good deeds, mitzvot, here and now. God was more offended by people's cruelty to one another than by their failure to observe ritual regulations or lack of religious zeal. The ideas about the afterlife in Judaism were vague and varied. Sheol, a subterranean realm of shadows, was mentioned, but its nature remained uncertain. Gehenna, which would later become hell in Christianity, was regarded simply as a rubbish dump outside the walls of Jerusalem, where fire burned constantly. There was no eternal torment awaiting anyone. It was simply a place where waste was burned. But gradually, very slowly and imperceptibly, something began to change. The image of Satan began to take on new features, new meaning. This was a long process, like the formation of a rock under the influence of millennia of forces. It was influenced by the encounters of Jewish culture with other traditions of the Middle East, by the influence of Zoroastrianism, with its clear division between the forces of light and darkness, between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. Zoroastrianism brought to the world the idea of cosmic dualism, the idea that there are two equal and opposite forces engaged in an eternal struggle for the souls of people and the fate of the world. It was a completely new understanding of evil, not as a lack of good, not as a test or a check, but as an independent, active force with its own will and its own goals. Imagine how these ideas seeped into the Jewish consciousness, especially during the Babylonian captivity, when the Jewish people came into direct contact with Persian culture and Zoroastrian concepts. It was like a river meeting another river on its way and changing its course, its color, its character. Some scholars believe that it was during this period that non-canonical texts began to appear in the Jewish tradition, such as the Book of Enoch, where Satan, for the first time, appears not just as a heavenly accuser, but as a fallen angel who rebelled against God. These texts did not become part of the official biblical canon of Judaism, but they influenced the formation of Christian theology. In these works, we see the birth of a new mythology. Satan here is no longer a servant of the heavenly court, but a rebel who is proud and wants to be equal to God. He is a beautiful and powerful cherub, the seal of perfection, the fullness of wisdom, and the crown of beauty. But his beauty becomes his curse, his perfection, his source of pride. This transformation was not just a literary device. It reflected profound changes in human understanding of the nature of evil, justice, and free will. The world was becoming more complex. Conflicts were becoming sharper, and old explanations could no longer satisfy people facing new challenges and new forms of suffering. The ancient roots of Satan's image go deep into the mythology of the Middle East. From ancient Egypt came the features of Seth, the god of the desert and thunderstorm, who was depicted with an animal head, red in color. From the Egyptian Anubis, the Judeo-Christian devil could get horns, tail, and black skin color. Sumerian mythology gave the conflict of Gilgamesh and Huwawa, where Huwawa appears as a monster with flaming lips. The influence of the ancient Greek Pan, half man, half goat, is particularly interesting. A British researcher suggests that it was from Pan that the Christian devil got his goat legs, hooves, ears, tail, and hair. Pan was the embodiment of hidden evil, not open aggression, but seduction, temptation, that which lurks in the depths of human nature. All these images, all these mythological fragments were slowly, over the centuries, fused into a new understanding of evil. And when the time came for the birth of Christianity, the ground was already prepared for a radical transformation of Satan's image. He was to turn from a heavenly prosecutor into a fallen angel, from a tester of faith into the embodiment of absolute evil, from a servant of divine justice into the main enemy of the human race. But this transformation was not instantaneous. It unfolded gradually, like dawn, when darkness slowly recedes before light, or like sunset, when light gradually gives way to darkness. And to understand how it happened, we need to immerse ourselves in the world of early Christianity, in the atmosphere of the times when the texts of the New Testament were being formed. Imagine a small room somewhere on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. The dim light of an oil lamp wavers on the walls, casting soft shadows. Here, at a roughly chiseled table, a man is bent over with a quill in his hand. He is writing a story that will change the world. He is telling how the divine became incarnate in a human body, how light came into the darkness, how love conquered death. And in this story, almost imperceptibly, an amazing transformation takes place. The ancient heavenly accuser transforms into something completely different. The early Christian communities lived in expectation. They believed that the world was coming to an end, that the time of final judgment would soon come, when good and evil would be divided forever. In this atmosphere of eschatological tension, in the midst of persecution and persecution, when every day could be the last, the image of Satan began to take on new, more poignant features. In the texts of the New Testament, we meet a completely different character. Here, Satan does not just test the faith of the righteous. He becomes the embodiment of evil, a fallen angel, a supreme demon, a cunning seducer who brings death and condemns people to eternal torment in hell. He becomes the main antagonist of God and the enemy of the entire human race. But how did this transformation take place? Let us take a mental journey back to the moment when the writers of the New Testament first picked up the ancient scrolls and began to reinterpret the old stories in the light of new revelation. They saw in every line of the Old Testament a foreshadowing of the coming Messiah, in every symbol an indication of the divine plan of salvation. And so their eyes stop at the 3rd chapter of Genesis, the story of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. In the ancient Jewish understanding, it was just a serpent, perhaps a symbol of wisdom, cunning, but nothing more. Christian theologians, however, saw something more here. If Christ is the new Adam, who came to correct the sin of the first man, then who was the one who seduced the first men? The logic was simple and convincing. It could only be Satan hiding in the guise of a serpent. This is how one of the central Christian doctrines was born: the idea that Satan first appears in the Bible in the form of the tempter serpent who seduced Eve in the Garden of Eden. This interpretation turned the ancient myth of the loss of innocence into a cosmic drama of the struggle between the forces of good and evil, where the stakes were the soul of all mankind. Imagine this moment, the morning of peace, when the dew still glistens on the leaves of the paradise trees, when the air is filled with the fragrance of flowers that will never fade, when death has not yet entered the world. And in this idyll, the serpent appears, not just an animal, but the embodiment of evil, the bearer of that which will destroy harmony forever. Did God truly say, "You shall not eat of any tree in paradise"? This question now sounds not like curiosity, but like the first attack in the war for the human soul. In Christian terms, this is the moment when evil first crosses the boundary between the heavenly and earthly worlds, when the cosmic conflict descends to earth and draws humanity into itself. But where did Satan himself come from? How did a beautiful angel become the embodiment of evil? Christian theologians have looked for the answer to this question in the prophetic texts of the Old Testament, and have found it in surprising places. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, there is a passage addressed to the king of Babylon. "How did you fall from heaven, O you son of dawn? You crashed to the ground, you who trampled on the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will exalt my throne. I will be like the Most High." These words, originally referring to an earthly ruler, have come to be understood in the Christian tradition as a description of the fall of Lucifer, the one who was light-bearing, the son of the dawn, the most beautiful of angels. The story of his fall became one of the most powerful and tragic stories in Christian mythology. Imagine this angel in the moment of his majesty. He is the seal of perfection, the fullness of wisdom, and the crown of beauty. His wings sparkle like precious stones. His voice sounds like heavenly music. His mind encompasses the mysteries of the universe. He stands near the throne of the Most High. He is one of the first among the sons of light. And then a thought arises in his heart that will change everything. Why not me? Why should I serve when I can rule? This thought, the seed of pride, grows in him like a poisonous tree. He begins to look at creation and sees it not as a manifestation of divine love, but as a field for his own domination. He looks at the other angels and sees not brothers, but potential subjects. He looks at God and sees not a father, but a rival. And there comes the moment of rebellion. In the Christian tradition, this moment is described as a cosmic war, a battle in the heavens where a third of the angels join Lucifer in his rebellion against divine order. Imagine this battle, not as a physical clash, but as a conflict of wills, as a moment when the unity of the heavenly world splits in two. Archangel Michael leads the faithful angels against the rebels. This is not a war of swords and spears. It is a war of principles, a conflict between humility and pride, between love and selfishness, between service and domination. And in the end, Lucifer and his supporters are defeated. They are cast out of the heavenly spheres, cast down into the abyss, and the beautiful light-bearer turns into Satan, the adversary, the enemy, the tempter. But even after the fall, he retains some of his former power. Christian tradition describes him as the prince of this world, as one who is temporarily given authority over earthly affairs. He is not equal to God. That would be a dualism that Christianity rejects. But he is powerful enough to pose a real threat to human souls. It is this fallen angel who appears to Jesus in the desert, offering him all the kingdoms of the world in exchange for his worship. It is he who acts through Judas's betrayal. It is he who is behind all the temptations and enticements that turn people away from the way of salvation. But the most important thing about the Christian version of this story is that his defeat is already foreshadowed. Jesus Christ has already defeated Satan through his death and resurrection, and the final victory is only a matter of time. In the revelation of John the theologian, we read how at the end of time, Satan will be finally bound and cast down into the lake of fire and brimstone, where he will be tormented forever and ever. This is no longer a temporary trial, as in the story of Job, but a final judgment, an eternal punishment for a cosmic crime. But what was this fallen angel supposed to look like? Surprisingly, we find no descriptions of the devil in early Christian art. The first Christians apparently preferred not to depict evil, so as not to give it additional power through visualization. They knew of his existence, believed in his reality, but did not seek to give him a face. Everything changed in the 9th century, when the Church began an active struggle against heresies and paganism. Now evil had to be not only known, but also seen, so that it could be recognized and avoided. And gradually, the devil acquired his classic appearance, with hooves, hairy legs, a goat's tail, pointed ears, a beard, a flattened nose, and 2 horns. These traits came from surprisingly different sources. The goat attribute came from the ancient Greek Pan, the same god who was the embodiment of natural instincts, sexuality, everything that the Church considered sinful. The horns and tail could have come from the Egyptian Anubis, the black color of his skin from various chthonic deities of antiquity. In the Middle Ages, the Church deliberately made the image of the devil repulsive and frightening. It wanted people not just to avoid evil, but to physically abhor it. The devil was depicted with rotting flesh, with a disgusting odor, with ugly facial features. He was the antithesis of all that was beautiful and holy. But here lies an amazing paradox. The more repulsive the image of the devil became in official church art, the more attractive he became in the popular imagination. People began to see in him not just the embodiment of evil, but a symbol of rebellion against injustice, a defender of the oppressed, someone who dares to say no to tyranny. This process happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. In folk tales and legends, the devil often turned out to be not so evil. He could be stupid. He could be deceived. He sometimes even helped ordinary people in their struggle against injustice. Of course, he always remained dangerous, always demanded a high price for his help, but he was no longer the absolute evil of church doctrine. Imagine a peasant working in the fields under the blazing sun while his lord indulges in luxury in his castle, or an artisan struggling to make ends meet while rich merchants profit from his labor. To such people, the image of the devil as a rebel against the established order might not seem so repulsive. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. In early Christianity, the devil was still an unambiguously evil figure, an enemy of the human race, a tempter and deceiver. His role was to turn people away from the way of salvation, to make them sin, to deprive them of the opportunity to enter paradise. And here we come to one of the most important differences between the Jewish and Christian understanding of evil. In Judaism, evil was part of the divine plan, a means of testing and purification. In Christianity, evil became an independent force in opposition to God, even if not equal to him in power. This difference has had enormous consequences for the whole of Western civilization. It has shaped our understanding of morality, justice, individual responsibility. It created the basis for the cosmic struggle between good and evil that permeates our entire culture, from medieval mysteries to modern superhero films. The Christian Satan is not just a test of faith, as in the story of Job. He is an active force of evil that seeks to destroy human souls, to lead them away from the path of salvation, to deprive them of eternal bliss. He uses all means, from direct temptation to subtle deception, from the promise of earthly goods to the threat of suffering. In the Christian tradition, it is Satan who is behind all the great temptations of history. He tempted Eve in paradise. He offered Jesus power over the world. He works through tyrants and corrupters, through heresiarchs and blasphemers. Wherever there is evil, there is his hand. But the most important thing about the Christian understanding of Satan is that his power is neither absolute nor eternal. He is powerful, but not omnipotent. He is cunning, but not omniscient. Most importantly, his defeat is already predetermined. The cross of Christ is his judgment. The resurrection is the seal on his tomb. In this perspective, earthly life turns into a grandiose drama where every human being is an actor playing a part in a cosmic play. The stake in this play is not just earthly happiness or unhappiness, but the eternal destiny of the soul. And Satan is the main villain in this drama, the one who seeks to thwart the divine plan of salvation. Imagine a starry night in the desert. The sand still retains the heat of the day, but the air is cool and clear. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear the long call of the muezzin, calling the faithful to prayer. Here, under this vast sky, dotted with diamonds of stars, another interpretation of the ancient story of the fall is born. Another look at the nature of evil, which will add new colors to our portrait of the one who some call Satan, others call Iblis, and others call simply the embodiment of the darker sides of the human soul. In Islamic tradition, this figure is named Iblis, a word that in Arabic means disappointment, hopelessness, despair. This name itself tells us that the Muslim understanding of this character differs from the Christian one. If the Christian Satan is an active force of evil, striving for destruction, the Islamic Iblis is, first of all, a being deprived of divine favor, immersed in his own despair. The Quranic account of the fall of Iblis is wonderfully poetic and tragic at the same time. Imagine this. Allah creates Adam, the first man, and orders all the angels to worship this new creation. The angels obey the divine will unquestioningly, all but one. Iblis, who until then had been the cleverest of the jinn, elevated by his knowledge to the level of the angels, refuses. "I am better than him," he says. "You made me out of fire and him out of clay." These words are not just pride, but logic, an attempt to understand and explain. Fire seems to be a more noble element than earth. Fire strives upwards. It is pure and bright, while clay is something earthy, heavy, mixed with water and mud. But the divine will needs no explanation, and Iblis's refusal leads to his banishment. He becomes a creature from whom divine favor is far removed, doomed to wander forever until the day of judgment. And here begins one of the most surprising features of the Islamic version of this story. There is no consensus in Islam about the nature of Iblis. Most theologians see him as a source of evil, an enemy of the human race, a tempter and a deceiver. But there are other voices, mystics and poets, who find something different in his story. For them, Iblis is a tragic figure, a true monotheist who could worship none but Allah himself. Hallaj, the great Sufi mystic of the 10th century, saw Iblis as the model of true devotion. Was he not the only one who refused to worship anyone but God? Did he not display the highest form of monotheism, preferring damnation to compromise with conscience? In this interpretation, Iblis becomes not a villain, but a martyr who suffered for the purity of his faith. Imagine this scene through the eyes of a Sufi poet. Iblis stands alone against the whole heavenly host. The angels bow before Adam, but he remains straight, adamant in his refusal. Perhaps in his eyes we would see not anger, but sadness. Sadness that no one understands his motives, that his devotion to God is seen as rebellion. Ain ol Azat Hamadani, another Sufi thinker, developed this theme even further. For him, the sin of Iblis could be forgivable or not a sin at all, because God himself has set up the whole thing. In this logic, Iblis is not an enemy of the divine plan, but a necessary part of it, a fulfillment of the role he was originally destined to play. Iblis's appearance in Islamic tradition is described in different ways, reflecting the diversity of ideas about his nature. Sometimes he appears as a one-eyed man with huge hands, an image that emphasizes his inferiority and incompleteness. In other descriptions, he is a terrible creature with red hair and burning eyes, the embodiment of horror and destruction. But there is a third option, a very beautiful winged creature, like an angel, who has retained a glimmer of his former greatness. This variation in descriptions suggests that the Islamic tradition did not seek to create a single canonical image of evil. Rather, it recognized the complexity and multifaceted nature of this phenomenon, its ability to take different forms depending on circumstances and perception. But to understand where the very idea of cosmic dualism came from, we need to turn to an even older tradition, Zoroastrianism. Imagine a high plateau in Iran, where among snowy peaks and vast steppes lived a people who were the first in the history of mankind to create a religion based on a clear division between good and evil. Zoroastrianism presented the world as an arena of eternal struggle between two opposing principles: Ahura Mazda, the embodiment of light, truth, and goodness, and Ahriman, the personification of darkness, falsehood, and evil. It was not a struggle between a god and a fallen angel, as in Christianity, but a conflict between two equal in power, but opposite in nature. In Zoroastrian cosmogony, every human being is a warrior in this eternal battle. Every deed, every thought, every word becomes a contribution to the victory of one of the sides. The world is not static. It is moving towards the final victory of good. But this victory is not predetermined. It depends on the choice of each living person. This teaching had a great influence on Jewish theology, especially during the Babylonian captivity, when the Jewish people were in direct contact with Persian culture. It was then that ideas about fallen angels, the cosmic struggle between good and evil, and the end of time when everything would be finally resolved, began to appear in Jewish texts. But Zoroastrian dualism was too radical for monotheistic religions. Neither Judaism, Christianity, nor Islam could accept the idea of two equal gods. So they transformed this concept, making evil a subordinate force, a rebellious creation of the one God, a powerful but not omnipotent adversary. And on this rich soil of various religious traditions, literature begins to grow. The image of Satan, Iblis, and the devil is firmly embedded in the classical literature of different nations, acquiring new dimensions and meanings. Writers and poets discover in this figure not only religious content, but also deep human motives, pride and humility, rebellion and submission, freedom and slavery. In English literature, the image of Satan first appears in medieval chronicles. Caedmon, in the 7th century, in his poem Christ and Satan, for the first time depicts Satan as a rebel who disagrees with the rule of God. It was a revolutionary idea for its time to portray the fallen angel not just as a source of temptation, but as an active opponent of divine authority. But the real literary revolution was made by John Milton in 1667, creating Paradise Lost. Milton radically reinterpreted the Christian tradition, creating an image of the devil opposite to the biblical one. His Satan is not a hideous monster of medieval art, but a majestic, almost heroic figure. Imagine Milton's Satan at the moment he wakes up in hell after his fall. He lies on a lake of fire, bound in adamantine chains, but his spirit is unbroken. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make heaven out of hell, hell out of heaven, he says. In these words resounds not repentance, but defiance, not humility, but a proud assertion of inner freedom. Milton made the devil attractive and handsome, endowed him with majesty and oratorical gift. His Satan makes speeches that would grace a parliamentary debate. He analyzes a situation with the logic of a politician. He inspires his supporters with the charisma of a great general. Better to be a lord in hell than a slave in heaven. This phrase has become one of the most famous in English literature. The whole philosophy of rebellion, the idea that freedom is more important than security, that dignity is more important than obedience, is centered in it. Milton did not justify evil. He made it clear that Satan represents absolute evil, that his beauty is deceptive, and his logic leads to destruction. But he made evil understandable, psychologically compelling. His devil is not the cardboard figure of medieval mysteries, but a complex, contradictory character whose motives can be understood without even approving of them. This approach ushered in a new era in the portrayal of evil in literature. Writers realized that the worst evil is not the one that looks disgusting, but the one that seems attractive. The devil who seduces people with beauty and nobility is far more dangerous than the devil who scares them with horns and hooves. In the 18th century, Daniel Defoe, in The Political History of the Devil, developed this tendency further. His devil exists not only in a religious context, but also within human history. He becomes a political force, a participant in historical events, a figure who influences the fate of nations and states. But the real revolution in understanding the image of Satan occurred during the Romantic era. The Romantics of the late 18th and early 19th centuries redefined the concepts of good and evil. Abandoning their traditional black and white understanding. For them, the devil became not the embodiment of universal evil, but a defender of mortals, a rebel against despotism, a symbol of freedom and knowledge. William Blake, in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, made Satan an ideological symbol linked to the revolutionary ideas of his time. Blake lived in the era of the French Revolution, when the old world was crumbling and the new world had not yet been born. For him, traditional notions of good and evil were part of an outmoded system that needed to be destroyed. Energy is the only life and proceeds from the body, and the mind is but the boundary or outer circumference of energy, wrote Blake. In his system, good was a passive principle, and evil was an active one. Good maintained the status quo, while evil moved history forward. The devil became the engine of progress, the force that kept the world from standing still. This idea was picked up and developed by other romantics. Percy Bysshe. Shelley, in his ballad The Devil's Walk, created a sharp political satire where the devil feels comfortable in the world of men because they are steeped in sins, and the world is no different from hell. But the interesting thing is that the blame for this state of the world is not placed on the devil, but on those who rule the world, kings, priests, and the rich. In his essay, Of the Devil and the Devils, Shelley went even further, arguing that Satan is not the personification of evil. Moreover, he questioned the goodness of God himself, arguing that God takes pleasure in the suffering of sinners. In this logic, the devil appears not to be the perpetrator of evil, but its victim. He is created by God with a certain nature and then punished for following that nature. George Gordon. Byron took this trend to its logical conclusion. In the poem Cain, his Lucifer is portrayed as a beautiful angel with a stern and sad appearance. He appears as a defender of mortals, a rebel against divine despotism and tyranny, a supporter of knowledge and truth. Byron reinterprets biblical images. God becomes a tyrant and tempter, and Lucifer becomes a wise counselor and like-minded man. In A Vision of Judgment, Byron presents Satan as an honest and fair prosecutor in a posthumous trial. He is proud and arrogant, treats God with disdain, but is not a slanderer. Michael and Satan are shown as colleagues rather than sworn enemies, professionals doing their jobs in the cosmic justice system. This tendency was not only characteristic of English literature. In Persian poetry, the great Molavi, known in the West as Rumi, in his Masnavi, presented Iblis as the touchstone necessary for the manifestation of man's inner purity. Molavi pointed to his love for Allah justifying his disobedience as the highest form of devotion. In Russian literature, this tradition was developed in the work of the great poets of the 19th century. Ivan Bunin, in his poem Satan to God, created the image of Satan based on the Quranic legend of Iblis's refusal to worship Adam. Bunin's Satan is proud of his fiery origin, claims to be a co-creator, claiming that he can give new qualities to the clay, man, and fights for man in the name of good. Mikhail Lermontov created one of the most psychologically complex images in Russian literature in his poem, The Demon. His demon is a dark spirit of doubt and denial, a fallen angel whose conflict lies in rebellion against his own nature. He longs for love and rebirth, but God's punishment manifests itself in the fact that evil persists in his nature, preventing him from changing. I am the one whose gums ruins hope. I am the one whom no one loves. I am the scourge of my earthly slaves. I am the king of knowledge and freedom. I am the enemy of heaven. I am the evil of nature. This is how Lermontov's demon appears. In these words, it is not the triumph of evil, but its tragedy, not the pride of power, but the bitterness of loneliness. Lermontov's poem had deep philosophical overtones. It was ambiguous and considered anti-religious, not because it glorified evil, but because it showed its humanity, its ability to suffer and long for redemption. Lermontov's demon is not a monster, but a tragic figure imprisoned by his own nature. In Azerbaijani literature, Hussein Javid presented another interpretation of this image in his play Iblis. His Satan embodies the evil nested in man himself and is the cause of man's vicious nature. But this is not an external force imposing evil from outside, but an internal conflict, a struggle between the higher and lower instincts in the human soul. Finally, in the 20th century, Mikhail Bulgakov created a completely new image of the devil in The Master and Margarita. His Woland is neither a rebel nor a tempter, but an ironic critic of modern reality, an observer who mocks human weaknesses and vices. He does not seek to destroy souls. He simply shows people their true nature, removing their masks and revealing what lies beneath them. Imagine the neon lights of a big city that twinkle in the night like distant stars. Somewhere in the depths of this stone labyrinth, in basements and attics, in abandoned warehouses and stylish flats, people gather for whom the ancient image of Satan has become not a religious figure, but a symbol of a completely different understanding of life. They do not worship the devil in the traditional sense. They see him as an archetype, an impersonal natural force, a manifestation of the dark but necessary aspects of human nature. Modern Satanism is a complex and ambiguous phenomenon. It emerged on the ruins of the traditional religious worldview, in an era when old answers no longer satisfied new questions. In a world where science has explained many of the mysteries of nature, where psychology has revealed the mechanisms of human behavior, where sociology has shown the conventionality of many moral norms, ancient religious systems have begun to seem to some people like outdated limitations. Satanism, in a narrow sense, is the worship of Satan. But in a broader sense, it is a destructive cult, a type of deviant behavior that consciously opposes Christianity. Its main feature is radical individualism, orientation on personal mystical experience, rejection of Christian values, cultivation of passion, and what traditional morality calls animal tendencies. For the modern Satanist, Satan is not necessarily a real being. He is often seen as a symbol, an archetype of inner power, an impersonal, natural energy, or simply a manifestation of the darker sides of human nature. He can be considered the god of this world, not in the sense of a cosmic ruler, but as a personification of material, earthly principles, opposite to the spiritual ideals of traditional religions. The ethical credo of modern Satanism can be expressed by the ancient formula: do what you will, that is your law. This is not a call for chaos or destruction, but an affirmation of absolute personal freedom. The concept of sin is denied, because sin, from this point of view, leads to the fulfillment of natural needs, while the suppression of these needs leads to psychological problems and inner conflicts. Imagine a person who has followed strict moral rules all his life, suppressed his desires, sacrificed his own interests for the sake of others, and suddenly realizes that many of these rules are simply social conventions, ways of controlling the individual. For such a person, Satanism can be a form of lay liberation, a way to regain control over his or her own life. The goal of Satanist practice is usually the attainment of superiority, power, wealth, fame, and fulfillment of desires. Satan is perceived as a force that brings freedom and promotes the development of individuality. In this system of views, the God of traditional religions is presented as a tyrant who seeks to suppress human nature, impose unnatural restrictions, and turn people into obedient slaves. God is a monkey of the Lord God, who foolishly imitates a reasonable man. Such formulations are found in Satanist literature. Behind these provocative words lies a serious philosophical position: the denial of external authority, the affirmation of man as the highest value, as the creator of his own destiny and his own morality. The ritual side of modern Satanism includes so-called black masses, parodies of Christian services, where all traditional symbols are turned upside down. Black candles instead of white ones. Inverted crucifixes. Pentagrams are used. The purpose of these rituals is not so much the worship of evil as psychological liberation from traditional inhibitions, symbolic destruction of old mental structures. Some groups practice sacrifices, usually of animals, although in extreme cases they may go as far as human sacrifice. The official purpose of such rituals is to extract astral energy. But psychologically, they serve to create a sense of power over life and death, to overcome the usual moral constraints. But why is Satanism spreading in the modern world? The reasons for this phenomenon are multiple and complex. First of all, it is the secularization of society and the resulting spiritual vacuum. When traditional religions lose their influence, people start looking for alternative forms of spirituality. And Satanism can become one of such alternatives. Disillusionment with traditional religions and their institutions also plays an important role. Many people see churches not as a source of spiritual wisdom, but as corrupt organizations seeking power and wealth. Satanism offers them a radical alternative, a complete rejection of all traditional authorities. The desire for secret knowledge and fascination with the occult is another factor. In an age when science has explained many of the world's mysteries, people still crave magic, miracles, a touch of the supernatural. Satanism promises access to hidden forces, to knowledge that official science does not provide. The lust for power and superiority is a basic human instinct that Satanism not only recognizes, but cultivates. In a world where many people feel powerless in the face of global processes, the promise of personal power and control can be very attractive. In the Satanist system, the inability to resist temptation becomes not a weakness, but a natural right. If Christianity calls for a struggle against one's own vices, Satanism proposes to accept and cultivate them as part of true human nature. The instability of society, the increase in crime, and the apologetics of cruelty in popular culture create an atmosphere in which Satanist ideas do not seem so extreme. When violence becomes commonplace, the idea that power is more important than morality begins to seem reasonable. Anthropological crisis, the disruption of normal self-identity, is another factor. In a world where traditional social roles are being eroded, where old forms of identity are losing their relevance, Satanism can offer a new form of self-definition. As a rebel, as the chosen one, as the one who dared to stand up against accepted norms. Finally, the exploitation of the image of the devil in mass culture plays a huge role in the popularization of Satanist ideas. Cinema, music, and literature of recent decades have created a romanticized image of Satan, who is often presented as an attractive, charismatic figure, a fighter for freedom against tyranny, a defender of individuality against conformity. Satanism in modern Russia has its own peculiarities. It is often associated with nationalistic ideas, appeals to the pagan past of the Slavs, opposing it to alien Christianity. Satanist groups are often linked to the criminal environment and use Satanist symbols as a form of intimidation and self-assertion. But behind all of these modern manifestations, we can see echoes of the ancient question with which our journey began. What is evil, and where does it come from? Modern Satanism is an attempt to answer this question in a radically different way than traditional religions have answered it. Whereas Christianity saw evil as a distortion of the good, a falling away from the divine will, Satanism proposes to see it as a natural and necessary force. Imagine a world where there is no concept of sin, where each person determines for himself what is good and bad for him. This may seem liberating, but it is also a world without compassion, without self-sacrifice, without love in its highest manifestation. It is a world where power rules, where the weak are doomed to suffer, where the only law is the law of the jungle. Perhaps that is why the image of Satan has always been so attractive and so frightening at the same time. He embodies those aspects of human nature that we are afraid to acknowledge but cannot completely suppress. He is our shadow, our second self, the part of us that craves power, pleasure, freedom from all constraints. And now, as we come to the end of our long journey through the history of this amazing character, it is time to ask the question: when did Satan become evil? The answer turns out to be more complicated than one might have thought at the beginning. In ancient Judaism, he was not evil. He was a tester, a heavenly prosecutor, one who helped to reveal the true nature of human faith. He became evil gradually under the influence of Zoroastrian dualism, as a result of the encounter between Jewish tradition and Persian thought, and in the process of forming Christian theology. Christianity made him a fallen angel, the embodiment of evil, the main enemy of the human race. But even in the Christian tradition, his image was not static. It changed from era to era, reflecting changes in human understanding of the nature of evil, free will, divine justice. In Islam, he became Iblis, a creature without divine favor. But for some mystics, he remained a tragic figure who suffered for the purity of his faith. In literature, he became a symbol of rebellion, freedom, knowledge, a defender of human dignity against tyranny, even if that tyranny came from God himself. In the modern world, it has become an archetype of individualism, a symbol of rejection of external authority, an embodiment of the right of each person to determine his own fate and morality. But in this transformation, it has not ceased to be dangerous. It has simply taken on new forms. Perhaps the most important thing we can learn from this story is the realization that images of good and evil are not immutable. They evolve with human consciousness, reflecting our deepest fears and desires, our ideas about justice and freedom, the meaning of life, and the nature of death. Satan has never been just a religious figure. He has always been a mirror in which humanity has seen its own contradictions. His story reflects our eternal struggle between the desire to obey a higher authority and the desire for absolute freedom, between the need for moral constraints and the thirst for unlimited power over our own lives. Each era created its own Satan, the one it needed to solve its problems and issues. The ancient Jews needed a heavenly accuser to help them test the truth of their faith. Early Christians, living in anticipation of the end of the world, needed a cosmic enemy against whom they could unite. Medieval theologians needed a frightening image to keep people from sinning. Romantics needed a symbol of rebellion against a conservative society. Modern individualists needed an archetype of personal freedom. And in each of these transformations, we can see not just a change in religious ideas, but the evolution of human consciousness, the development of our ideas about ourselves, our place in the world, our rights and duties. Perhaps the next era will create its own Satan, one that we can't even imagine yet. Perhaps it will be the digital devil of the age of artificial intelligence, or the environmental demon of the age of climate change, or some entirely new form that we can't even imagine right now. But one thing remains unchanged. As long as human consciousness exists, as long as we are able to ask questions about good and evil, about freedom and responsibility, about the meaning of life and the mysteries of death, the image of Satan will live and transform with us. It will serve as a mirror of our fears and desires, a symbol of our inner conflicts, an embodiment of those aspects of human nature that we are afraid to acknowledge, but cannot completely suppress. And that may be its true function, not to tempt or frighten, not to lead us to good or evil, but to make us think, to doubt, to seek answers to eternal questions. It is to keep us from becoming complacent in our beliefs, from thinking that we know all the answers. For true evil may not lie in rebellion against God or in breaking moral precepts, but in intellectual laziness, in an unwillingness to ask difficult questions, in a willingness to accept simple answers to complex problems. And if Satan helps us avoid this evil by making us think and doubt, then perhaps he fulfills the same function he did in the ancient story of Job, that of one who finds weaknesses and makes us play better. And now, my dear listeners, our night journey comes to an end. We have come a long way. From the ancient scrolls of the Old Testament, through Christian monasteries and Islamic madrasas, through university halls and theaters, through the pages of great books and the screens of modern cinemas, we have seen the same image take thousands of different forms, reflecting the fears and hopes, dreams and nightmares of countless generations of people. I hope that this journey has not only broadened your knowledge of religion and literature, but also helped you to better understand yourself, your own inner conflicts, your ideas about good and evil, freedom and responsibility. For ultimately, the story of Satan is our own story, the story of the human soul in its eternal search for meaning and truth. May your dreams tonight be peaceful, and tomorrow bring new discoveries and new questions. Goodbye, and see you in our next night wanderings through the vast expanse of human thought and imagination. Good night.